The legends of pirates, those audacious marauders who once haunted the vast oceans, conjuring images of skull flags, buried gold, and forbidden romance, have taken a grip on our collective imagination. While swashbuckling epics like Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean have transformed them into near-mythical figures, dashing and free-spirited, the cinematic allure often veils the stark truth. Beneath the glittering veneer of Hollywood lies a gritty, tumultuous world rife with danger and hardship. Journey with us beyond the edge of the map as we navigate through the turbulent waters of the 18th century, dispelling myths and unearthing the raw, unvarnished reality of pirate life. The haunting chronicle of the Sea Serpent, a pirate ship captained by the infamous Bartholomew Roberts, offers a gruesome window into the perilous world of pirates. In 1721, a group led by First Mate Charles Fletcher, fed up with Captain Roberts's increasing cruelty and perceived unfair division of spoils, plotted to seize control of the ship. The mutiny erupted one fateful night as Fletcher and his supporters, fortified by stolen rum, attacked the sleeping crew with cutlasses and pistols. The deck became a bloodbath, with men torn from their slumbers, only to face a brutal end. Captain Roberts, roused by the screams of his men, fought fiercely, but was eventually overpowered and thrown overboard, bound and gagged. For those who sided with Fletcher, the rewards were immediate. They raided the ship's coffers and celebrated their newfound power. However, the mutineers' elation was short-lived. Their brutality had turned many neutral crew members against them. Within days, another revolt ensued, led by those horrified by the massacre they had witnessed. This counter-revolt was equally bloody, with Fletcher meeting a grisly end, keel-hauled beneath the ship, his body torn apart by barnacles and sea life. Historical records, including testimonies from surviving crew members in the subsequent trial in Port Royal, underscore the relentless paranoia that gripped pirate ships. The fear that allies could turn into foes overnight created an atmosphere of mistrust and tension, making life aboard these ships even more precarious. The pirate life, despite its portrayal in films as a continuous adventure, was fraught with perils that went beyond skirmishes and naval combat. Diseases, often overlooked in blockbuster films, were rampant and brutal in their impact. Scurvy, caused by a deficiency of vitamin C, was one of the most common afflictions among sailors during the early 1700s. Its symptoms, bleeding gums, joint pain, and anemia, were debilitating. While long sea voyages without fresh produce were primarily to blame, the lack of medical knowledge at the time meant that its cure remained elusive. Historical logs and journals, like those of ship's surgeons like James Lind in the mid-18th century, reveal the devastating effects of scurvy. Lind's experiments with citrus fruits eventually led to the understanding that lemon or lime juice could prevent the disease. However, it would take years for this knowledge to become standard practice, and by then, countless sailors and pirates had suffered. Contrary to the supernatural curses that brought Captain Barbossa back to life in Pirates of the Caribbean, real pirates had no such miracles. Simple injuries, a cut or a gunshot, which characters like Captain Blood in the 1935 film might shrug off, posed grave threats. With the unsanitary conditions on ships and the lack of antibiotics, infections were rampant. Gangrene, a dreaded outcome, could lead to amputations without anesthesia or even result in death. Why would someone in the early 18th century, faced with the perils of the open sea, ruthless combat, and the constant threat of a noose if caught, choose the life of a pirate? The allure of piracy was not always rooted in a love for adventure or rebellion, but often in sheer economic desperation. In the early 1700s, Europe, especially England, was undergoing a surge in population, leading to a decrease in wages and an increase in prices. For a common sailor, life aboard a merchant or naval ship was hardly more appealing than that on a pirate vessel. Wages for an average sailor on a merchant ship, according to historical records, were notoriously low, often around £25 annually, and that's if they were paid promptly. Many sailors faced wage theft or were press-ganged into the Navy without consent, where conditions were even more stringent. Compare this to pirate loot. One captured merchant ship could yield 50 pounds for even the lowest-ranking pirate, effectively doubling his annual income in a single raid. Furthermore, pirate ships often operated on a more egalitarian basis. Booty was split relatively evenly, and captains might earn only twice the share of a crewman, rather than the vast disparities seen on legal vessels. So if you were a young sailor in the 18th century struggling to eke out a living and facing the stark economic disparities, wouldn't the allure of piracy, with its promise of wealth and freedom, seem like a viable alternative? For many, the answer was a resounding yes. And this economic drive, combined with harsh societal conditions, fueled the golden age of piracy. Branding in the realm of piracy was not about marketability, but survivability. The terrifying symbols and behaviors adopted by pirates, such as the iconic skull and crossbones flag, were strategic tools aimed at instilling paralyzing fear in the hearts of their potential victims. By building a ruthless reputation, pirates often avoided actual combat, making their raiding endeavors more efficient. Blackbeard, or Edward Teach, was a master of this psychological warfare. Historical accounts tell us that before boarding a ship, Blackbeard would weave hemp into his beard and light it on fire, creating a menacing halo of smoke around his head. This terrifying image, combined with his tall stature and dark, piercing eyes, painted the picture of a man who was more demon than human. His ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, hoisted multiple flags, including the skull and crossbones, accentuating his fearsome reputation. When merchant ships saw Blackbeard's infamous flags on the horizon, many surrendered without a fight, their wills broken by the sheer terror of the pirate's reputation. This use of branding and psychological tactics not only facilitated easier plunder, but also saved resources and the lives of Blackbeard's crew. The dread that Blackbeard's name alone instilled in sailors up and down the American coast was a testament to how powerful and effective these tactics were. It's a poignant example of how in the high-stakes world of piracy, reputation could be just as lethal as a broadside of cannons. Despite the camaraderie often shown in pirate films, the world they inhabited was strict and often merciless. Disobedience and treachery were met with severe reprisals. Among the most dreaded punishments was marooning. This act of abandoning a crew member on an uninhabited island with maybe a gun and a few provisions was both a physical and psychological torture. The solitude, coupled with the scant hopes of rescue, often drove marooned pirates to despair. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island portrays marooning as a dramatic punishment, especially in the case of Ben Gunn, who survives and eventually finds Flint's treasure. However, historical records suggest a darker reality. For instance, Charles Vane, a notorious pirate captain, was marooned by his crew in 1718 for his cowardice in battle. Although Vane was eventually rescued, he was later captured and hanged. Marooning was not the only punishment. Keel hauling, a gruesome practice where a sailor was tied to a line and dragged under the ship, was used to punish severe transgressions. The barnacle-covered hull would lacerate the sailor's body, leading to severe injuries or death. Such brutal forms of discipline underscore the vast difference between the world of real pirates and their Hollywood counterparts. While films offer a romanticized version, delving into historical accounts presents a stark and often grim picture of life during the golden age of piracy. In popular films like Pirates of the Caribbean and Cutthroat Island, the ships are depicted as vast, majestic vessels. The Black Pearl, for instance, serves as a stunning backdrop to Captain Jack Sparrow's adventures, yet the reality for most pirates was significantly different. The majority sailed on smaller sloops or brigantines, not the large galleons or frigates that Hollywood often portrays. Historical records, for example, point to the infamous pirate Blackbeard, whose flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a sizable vessel but certainly not the standard. Most pirates preferred quicker, more maneuverable ships, allowing them to evade larger naval vessels or quickly overtake merchant ships. These ships often accommodated crews of 75 to 100 men, leading to congested living conditions. Imagine the struggles of maintaining hygiene, managing disease, or even just finding a comfortable spot to rest. The perilous life of pirates wasn't limited to battles and mutinies. Diseases, with their grotesque symptoms, were constant, uninvited shipmates. Scurvy, caused by a deficiency in vitamin C, was rife among them. Historical logs note sailors' gums becoming swollen, bleeding profusely at the slightest touch. Teeth would loosen, and without treatment, death was imminent. A diet devoid of fresh fruits, particularly citrus, was the culprit. Another menace was dysentery, often acquired from consuming contaminated water or food. It led to severe dehydration from relentless diarrhea, occasionally speckled with blood or mucus. Untreated, it could turn fatal within days. Then there was typhus, transmitted by lice. Fever, delirium, and a distinctive rash were its trademarks. One notable outbreak in 1720 aboard the pirate ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, led by the infamous Blackbeard, reportedly decimated much of the crew, proving that sometimes the most potent enemies are invisible. Space constraints meant that pirates often had to sleep in hammocks strung close together or on the deck itself. Their bedding was frequently nothing more than a simple cloth or the clothes on their backs, leaving them vulnerable to storms and the harsh ocean climate. The dichotomy between this harsh reality and the spacious, almost luxurious cabins of Captain Jack Sparrow provides a striking contrast. The romanticized view of pirates as unruly rogues without a semblance of order is challenged when we delve into their actual practices. One of the more historically accurate aspects portrayed in films is the Pirate Code, or Articles of Agreement. These were contracts that every crew member, regardless of their position, would sign or make their mark upon, agreeing to abide by a set of stipulated rules. For instance, Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates of the golden age of piracy, had a set of articles that every crew member aboard his ship had to agree to. They included provisions about fair distribution of plunder, compensation for injuries sustained in combat, and even a rule forbidding the playing of cards for money. These codes were far from mere guidelines. Breaking them could result in marooning, whipping, or even execution. What's even more fascinating and less depicted in cinema is the level of democracy aboard pirate ships. Crew members, not just the officers, had a voice in decisions like pursuing a particular ship or anchoring at a particular port. Captains were chosen based on merit and leadership skills, and they remained in command only as long as they retained the crew's respect and confidence. If a captain were deemed incompetent or overly tyrannical, he could be deposed. This semblance of democracy stands in stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies of the naval and merchant vessels of the time. While Pirates of the Caribbean, at World's End, does touch upon the concept of the Pirate Code, it's more a council guideline for all pirates. Real pirate codes were unique to each ship and were crucial to maintaining order and discipline. The juxtaposition of the cinematic portrayal of the pirate code and the practical, democratic nature of real pirate life offers a rich tapestry of contrasts and parallels, reflecting both the myths and truths of pirate existence. The image of pirates in popular culture, swashbuckling adventurers, treasure hunters, and rebellious rogues, has long captivated the imaginations of audiences worldwide. But beneath the sheen of Hollywood's glamorous portrayal lies a more somber and at times brutal reality of what it truly meant to wage war on the high seas. To begin with, sea battles were not neatly choreographed affairs. The brutal mechanics of naval warfare during the golden age of piracy, approximately from the late 17th century to the early 18th century, were not for the faint of heart. Ships used cannons as their primary long-range weapon. When a cannonball struck a ship's hull, it didn't merely create a picturesque explosion of splinters. It could tear massive holes into the ship, jeopardizing its buoyancy. And those splinters, they became deadly projectiles themselves, maiming or killing anyone in their path. A notable example of the lethal nature of naval warfare can be seen in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, though it's slightly after the golden age of piracy. British Admiral Nelson's victory over the French and Spanish fleets is often celebrated for its tactical genius, but the reality of the battle was gruesome. Over 8,000 men were killed or wounded. Ship decks were awash with blood, and the sounds of battle were punctuated with the screams of the wounded and the dying. And when ships drew close, the real carnage began. Pirates and naval crews alike would engage in fierce hand-to-hand combat. Contrary to popular depictions of skilled swordsmen dancing around their opponents, these skirmishes were desperate struggles. The cutlass, a short, broad saber, was the pirate weapon of choice. Its design was not for finesse, but for hacking through flesh and bone in the confined spaces of a ship's deck. Boarding pikes, axes, and even bare fists were used in these close-quarters battles. Injuries were not just limited to cuts and stabs. Broken bones, concussions, and other traumatic injuries were commonplace. Historically documented instances, such as Blackbeard's final battle near Ocracoke Island in 1718, reveal the brutality of these confrontations. Blackbeard's ship, the Adventure, engaged in a fierce battle with Lieutenant Robert Maynard's crew. The fight was so brutal that by its end, Blackbeard had sustained 25 wounds, 5 of which were gunshot wounds, before succumbing. Maynard's victory came at a high price, with many of his own men dead or grievously injured. Yet the danger wasn't limited to direct combat. The mere act of damaging an enemy ship could lead to catastrophic consequences. If a ship's hull was breached below the waterline, it could quickly take on water. Without modern pumping systems, sailors would desperately try to bail water out using buckets, but a significant breach often spelled doom. For those aboard, the chilling prospect of being trapped below decks as water rushed in was a very real threat. The sinking of the Whydah galley in 1717, a former slave ship turned pirate ship captained by Black Sam Bellamy, serves as a grim reminder. Caught in a storm off the coast of Cape Cod, the ship was driven onto sandbars and quickly broke apart, drowning most of its crew. In the turbulent seas of the 18th century, imagine a sailor, grievously wounded, battling both his injuries and the elements. Each crashing wave brings an excruciating sting as the abrasive salt water meets his raw flesh. This isn't merely a momentary discomfort, it's the tangible feeling of cell damage. Salt, with its dehydrating properties, accelerates tissue decay, making every minor cut or gash a potential gateway to fatal infections. Amidst the relentless sun and rolling waves, dehydration becomes an imminent threat, compounding the sailor's suffering. Suddenly, a violent jolt from the ship throws the sailor into the vast, pitiless ocean. His instinct is to fight, to gasp for every breath, his muscles cramping from the unyielding pull of the waves and his soaked clothes weighing him down. Panic intensifies as he inadvertently swallows salt water, leading to painful coughing fits that sap his already dwindling oxygen. The feeling is overwhelmingly claustrophobic. The water's cold grip suffocates him, a burning sensation filling his lungs. As he descends into darkness, the brain, deprived of oxygen, conjures disjointed hallucinations. His once robust heart slows to a halt. Now, the sailor's lifeless body drifts in the very sea that once sustained him, a poignant reminder of nature's remorseless might and the fragility of life in its midst. Pirates navigating the treacherous waters of the high seas often found themselves trailed by menacing fins cutting through the waves. It wasn't personal, of course. Sharks were lured in by the waste and scraps thrown overboard from the ship. This organic debris attracted smaller sea life, which in turn provided a smorgasbord for these apex predators. So, while swashbucklers had to fear mutinies and rival pirates, a continuous reminder of the ocean's unforgiving nature lurked just beneath the surface. While the romantic tales of pirates might suggest a life of freedom and adventure, the real-life consequences of piracy and naval warfare were brutal and unforgiving. The sea, with its vastness and unpredictability, only added to the danger. Every skirmish, every cannon shot, and every boarding attempt carried the weight of potential death, serving as a stark contrast to the carefree pirates of cinematic lore. If this narrative resonated with you, do support us. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe. Thank you for staying with us to the end. See you in the next video on Plaid Chronicles.